My phone lit up at 6:14 in the morning. I was still half asleep, reaching for it with one eye open, thinking it was my alarm. But it was a text from my co-founder, the man I hadn't heard from in 11 months. Saw the Bloomberg piece. Congratulations, Jade. Really proud of what you've built. I think it's time we talked. The team misses you. I set the phone face down on the nightstand. I stared at the ceiling. The fan was spinning slowly overhead. I counted the rotations. 1, 2, 3. 11 months of silence. Not a word. Not when I signed the exit papers. Not when I moved out of the office I had designed myself. The one with the exposed brick and the wall of windows I had negotiated for 3 weeks to get in the lease. Not on my birthday. Not when my grandmother died and I posted about it publicly. 11 months of absolute nothing. But this morning, Bloomberg ran a profile. They called my new company one of the most disruptive logistics platforms in the country. They mentioned a Series A, $44 million. They put my picture on the front of the technology section. And before the ink was dry, metaphorically speaking, his name was on my screen. I didn't feel surprised. I felt cold. The kind of cold that isn't temperature, it's clarity. Before I tell you what happened next, you need to understand what happened before. You need to understand the night I sat alone in a conference room at the company I had built from nothing, signing papers that ended my role in it. You need to understand that night, because without it, nothing that came after makes any sense. I was 27 when my co-founder and I started the company. His name was Fletcher. We met through a mutual friend at a pitch event in Austin. I had the idea and the technical background. He had the network and the charm. It seemed like a perfect split. Complementary skill sets, everyone said. Dream team, people called us. For 2 years it was. We worked 18-hour days in a converted garage. We pitched to 43 investors before we got our first yes. I remember the exact number because I kept a list on a yellow legal pad. 43 rejections. The 44th said yes. We grew. We hired. We moved into a real office. I built the product from the architecture up. Fletcher handled business development and investor relations. He was good at it. He made everything look easy. He walked into a room and people liked him immediately. I was the one at the whiteboard at midnight. But he was the one shaking hands at lunch. And in the startup world, sometimes that matters more than anyone wants to admit. The problem started small. They always do. A meeting I wasn't invited to. An investor call where he spoke for both of us without asking. A hire he made without consulting me. Someone from his old company who reported directly to him and seemed to have no idea I was also a founder. I said something about it once. We were in the small kitchen of the office, both reaching for coffee at the same time. I said, "Fletcher, I feel like I'm being cut out of some of the bigger decisions." I kept my voice calm, measured. He looked at me like I was being unreasonable. He actually laughed a little. Not mean, just dismissive. "Jade, you're the technical genius. I'm keeping the business stuff off your plate so you can focus. Isn't that what you want?" I didn't know what I wanted. I wanted to feel like a founder, not a contractor. But I let it go. I went back to the whiteboard. 6 months later, a new investor came in. A big one. The kind that sends 4 people to a meeting and asks questions for 3 hours. After that meeting, Fletcher sat across from me in his office and said he wanted to restructure the equity split. He said the investor had concerns about our operational clarity. He said it would help to have a clear CEO with a majority stake. He said he thought that should be him. I looked at him for a long time. I remember thinking, this is the moment. I remember thinking, this is the moment. I remember thinking I had a choice. I could fight. I could get a lawyer. I could dig in, but Fletcher had already had the conversation with the investor before he had it with me. The terms were structured before I sat down in that chair. He told me this like it was a formality. He told me they had already agreed on a timeline. He used the phrase, "what's best for the company," 4 times in 15 minutes. I counted. I owned 38%. Under the restructure, I would own 12. I would have a title, Chief Technology Officer. I would have a salary. I would have a salary. I would lose my board seat. I signed. I don't fully understand why. Maybe because I was exhausted. Maybe because I believed in the product so much. I thought 12% of something real was better than 38% of a war. Maybe because I was 28 years old and I didn't have anyone in my corner telling me not to. The night I signed, I drove home alone. I sat in my car in the parking garage of my apartment building for 40 minutes. I didn't cry. I just sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, engine off, listening to the sound of nothing. 3 weeks after I signed, I came into work and my key card didn't work. My laptop had been remotely wiped. Fletcher sent me an email an hour later saying the board had decided the CTO role was redundant at this stage and that they were eliminating the position. There was a severance offer attached. Standard language, clean, he CDD jar. He didn't call me. He didn't even pick up when I called him. I stood in the lobby of my own company with a cardboard box and my phone ringing into his voicemail. The security guard at the front desk looked at his hands. He knew. Everyone knew. They just didn't look at me. I took the severance. I signed the NDA. I left. For 6 weeks, I didn't do much of anything. I ran. I cooked elaborate meals I barely ate. I reorganized every closet in my apartment twice. I didn't talk about what had happened because the NDA made me nervous, and also because I was ashamed. Not ashamed of what had been done to me. Ashamed that I had let it happen. That I had signed. That I had believed. But somewhere around week 7, something shifted. I was sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning with a legal pad. And instead of writing down what I was angry about, I started writing down what I knew. What I actually knew. The industry. The gaps in the market. The mistakes I had watched Fletcher make that I hadn't been allowed to fix. I started over. I called my new company Meridian. I built it from my kitchen. I hired my first engineer, a woman named Cecile who had actually quit the old company 6 months before I left because she said something felt off. She was the first person I told everything to. She listened. She said, "Okay, what do we build?" We built it fast. We built it right. I made sure this time that every contract, every equity agreement, every handshake was on paper and reviewed by an attorney I paid for myself. I was not the same person who had sat in that garage 2 years ago thinking good intentions were enough. At the end of year 1, we had our first enterprise client. At the end of year 2, we had 12. The month before Bloomberg ran the profile, we closed a Series A. The number was $44 million. The morning the article went live, I read it in my home office before anyone else in my building was awake. My coffee was getting cold. I had read the draft 3 times already, but I read the final version slowly. I got to the part where they described our valuation and I had to stop. I just sat there with the laptop open and the cold coffee and the silence. I had done it. Without him. And then the text arrived. I spent the rest of that morning in meetings. Product review. Hiring panel, a catch-up with our head of operations. I kept my phone face down. After the last call ended, I picked it up and read his message again. The team misses you. His team. His current team, the people who had watched me walk out of my own company with a cardboard box and said nothing. The team that had sent me a group gift card when I left because it was awkward not to. A Visa gift card for $40. I still have it. I never used it. I'm not sure why I kept it. Maybe as evidence. I thought about ignoring the message, but something else occurred to me. Something slow and quiet that had been building for 11 months. I typed back, "Sure. When?" He responded in under 3 minutes. He wanted to have dinner, not coffee, dinner. He suggested a restaurant we used to go to when the company had a good week. Back when there were good weeks and we were still us. It was not a coincidence. We met on a Thursday. I took a ride share because I didn't want to deal with parking. When I walked in, he was already there. He stood up when he saw me. He smiled the same smile he always had, the one that worked in pitch meetings, the one that made investors feel like they were in good hands. He looked exactly the same. I probably looked different to him. I had cut my hair. I was wearing a blazer I had bought the week after closing the Series A, the kind I could never justify buying before. I looked like someone who ran a company because I did. "Jade," he said, like we were old friends who had simply lost touch. "Fletcher," I said. We sat down. We ordered. He steered the conversation through 3 topics before he said anything real. He asked about my family. He mentioned a mutual friend. He talked about some travel he had done. I answered in short sentences and watched him. Then he leaned forward. The smile shifted into something more serious. He said, "I know things ended badly between us. I thought about it a lot. I think we made some decisions that weren't fair to you, and I think there's a way to correct that." I said, "What does correcting it look like?" He said the company had hit some turbulence. He used that word specifically, turbulence. He said the product roadmap had stalled because the engineering team was struggling without strong leadership at the top. He said 2 of their biggest clients had made noise about leaving. He said the board was asking questions. Then he said, "We want you to come back. As CEO, full equity restoration. We think with your name on it again, especially after the Bloomberg piece, we can stabilize and be in a real position to grow." I looked at my water glass for a moment. I set my fork down. "You want me to come back?" I said. "Yes," he said. He nodded. He looked sincere. He was always very good at looking sincere. "Full equity restoration," I said. "That's 38%? "That's what we're proposing," he said. "There would be a period of formal transition, of course, but yes." I said, "Can I ask you something?" He said, "Of course." I said, "When did the engineering team start struggling?" He hesitated. "Over the last year or so. It's been gradual." "And when did the clients start making noise?" Another pause. "The last 6 months, maybe." "And the board, when did they start asking questions?" He said, "Jade, I know what you're doing and I want you to know I understand the skepticism. I deserve it. But I'm being sincere here. This is a real offer." I said, "I know it's a real offer. That's not what I'm asking." He looked at me for a long moment. I opened my bag. I placed a tablet on the table between our plates. I turned it toward him. "I've been watching your company for 11 months, I said. My voice was even, not obsessively, just professionally. You're in a vertical. I know well, and I like to track market conditions." He looked at the screen. His expression changed. "Your churn rate is 41% year over year," I said. "Your 2 largest enterprise clients, one of whom I originally closed, both moved to preliminary evaluations with competitors 3 months ago. Your Series B was supposed to close in Q1. It's Q3 and there's been no announcement. Your head of product left in February and you promoted someone internally who has no product background." I scrolled down on the tablet. "Your burn rate suggests you have 9 months of runway, maybe 10 if you cut headcount, which you already started doing quietly. 2 engineers I know personally reached out to me last month looking for roles. They didn't mention you by name, but they mentioned the culture had gotten difficult." Fletcher was very still. He was holding his wine glass but not drinking from it. "The Bloomberg piece," I said, "came out Tuesday morning. You texted me at 6:14 a.m. He said, "Jade, I'm not finished," I said. He stopped. "You don't want me to come back because you miss my technical vision. You want me to come back because my name in your cap table and my face in your press materials will help you close the Series B. You can't close on your own. The 38% equity restoration isn't generosity. It's a Hail Mary. You're hoping my credibility buys you 6 more months." He set the wine glass down. He looked at the tablecloth. "Am I wrong?" I said. He was quiet for a long time. Outside the restaurant, a car went past. A couple at the next table laughed at something. The waiter walked by and pretended not to notice the silence. Finally, Fletcher said, "It's more complicated than that." "It always is," I said. I picked up my fork and took a bite of my dinner. I was hungry. I had been nervous before this meeting, but now I felt fine, actually. Calm in a way that surprised me. Fletcher tried again. He said the offer was still on the table. He said he knew he had handled things badly. He said he was sorry, actually said the word, which he had never done before. He said the company still had real value and we could build something together the way we were supposed to, the way it was supposed to go. He said, "You belong at that table, Jade. You always did." I thought about the lobby, the key card, the email with HR copied, the $40 gift card. I thought about Cecile, who had believed in me when I had barely believed in myself. I thought about my team, the people I had hired, the engineers and operators and sales leads who came to Meridian when there was nothing to come to yet. I thought about what we had built, I said, Fletcher, I appreciate that, sincerely, but I already have a table. He looked at me. In fact, I said, I need to tell you something. My attorney sent a letter to your board yesterday. I should have mentioned it at the start of the dinner, but I wanted to talk first. He said, What letter? I had flagged this to my legal team 2 weeks before the Bloomberg piece ran. My NDA had a specific non-disparagement clause, but it also had a clause about equity compensation methodology that I had always suspected was legally questionable. My attorney agreed. We had been building the case quietly. But more than that, Meridian had been in early acquisition conversations with a logistics company that was also in preliminary talks with Fletcher's company about a partnership. A partnership that, if it went through, would affect some intellectual property that had been developed during my time there, IP I had built, IP that, under the original founder agreement that predated the restructure, I had certain retained rights over. I explained this at the table, simply, without trauma. I watched Fletcher's face do something complicated. You can ask your attorney to review the letter, I said. The terms are straightforward. We're not looking to litigate. We just want acknowledgement of the IP position and appropriate compensation. It's a clean resolution, he said. How long have you been planning this? I said, since about week 7. He looked at me for a moment, not with anger, with something closer to recognition, like he was seeing me for the first time as the person I had been all along. The letter, he said finally. How long do we have to respond? 30 days, I said. But I'd recommend sooner. The logistics company is moving fast. I finished my dinner. Fletcher didn't eat much. The waiter came to ask about dessert, and Fletcher said no, and I said yes, and ordered the thing I always used to order at this restaurant, the thing I had ordered the first time we came here, to celebrate a good week, back when we were building something together and I thought it would last. It was good. The restaurant made it the same way they always had. Fletcher signed the terms 22 days later. His attorney called mine. It wasn't a dramatic moment. I was in a team meeting when my phone buzzed with the confirmation email. I looked at it for 3 seconds and put my phone back in my bag and went back to listening to my head of engineering talk about the deployment schedule for Q4. That was enough. That was more than enough. What I know now. That I couldn't have told you in the parking garage that night with my hands on the wheel and the engine off, is that the worst part of being pushed out of something you built isn't the loss. It's the story you tell yourself about it. The one where you were too quiet, too technical, too trusting. The one where you handed someone the keys and they drove away without you. I had to stop telling that story. I had to write a different one. And the only way to write a different one was to start building again, in the dark, with a legal pad and cold coffee and one person who believed me. The new story doesn't have a villain, exactly. It just has a lesson I wish I had learned sooner. The table you deserve is not the one someone else sets for you. It's the one that you build yourself. And mine already has 38 seats. We're adding more. Have you ever had to outgrow someone to find out who you actually were? Tell me in the comments. And if you're watching from somewhere that needed to hear this today, I'm really glad you're here.